بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأجمعين أما بعد. My respected elders, Ikhwan, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, I'm starting to get to know Imam Raqeeb a little bit better, and you know, when a brother is not born in this country, right, and he talks real smooth, we say that he's been hanging around a lot of African Americans. So Imam Raqeeb talks real smooth, man, I'm telling you. I didn't know who he was talking about a few minutes ago. So mashallah. It's an honor to be here, alhamdulillah. I pray Allah Ta'ala accept the khutbah that we did today. I ask you to make dua for me. And I ask if I have offended anybody, please, I ask you for your forgiveness, and may Allah Ta'ala have forgiveness for me. My only desire in this life is to be free of this dunya. My heart is truly wanting to be pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jalla. I have no other desires other than that to be a better husband. But I'm telling you, one of the heights of my thing being here in California, because I'm originally from New York, and being here in California now 2 years and a year at Masjid Ibrahim, it has been a struggle because, you know, some of y'all are aware of the past struggles that Masjid Ibrahim had. But the climax of this was to be able to go to Hajj with Imam Raqeeb and Imam Tahir. And it's something that Imam Tahir told me the other day. He said, because of that, Allah Ta'ala has attached our hearts as brothers in this life and in the next, inshallah ta'ala. So I have been in the company of good people, and I'm in the company of good people tonight. So this program that Rashid has put together was basically to, you know, kind of highlight some of the points of African American or Muslims of African American descent in this country. For me, I was born Muslim in this country. My father accepted Islam in 1955. And I was born about 62, 63. My mother can't make up her mind. So it's one of the two, right? So, as a Muslim living in this country, I have, and my wife also, have a different perspective maybe of people that have reverted to Islam or converted, whatever word you want to use. So what I wanted to highlight very quickly is a historical perspective of that, right? Now, most of you probably know the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and Minister Farrakhan now. And some may have or come to the conclusion of Islam starting at that particular point. And I wanted to kind of clear that up a little bit if I could. Now, the Nation of Islam existed and it still exists for the most part now. And it was established in 1933. But that was not the beginning of Islam, because the Nation of Islam, let's make this very clear, is a movement or an organization that has Islamic terminologies, but the aqidah is something else, right? So when Imam Siraj was here a couple of months ago when we was doing our fundraiser, we was talking about Minister Farrakhan. So Imam Siraj knows him much more intimately than I do, and I have been around or known of Farrakhan for 30 years, at least, if not more. But he said of Minister Farrakhan's charisma, if he just stuck to the social issues, there's no imam that in my lifetime can call 1 million men to come to a city. Imam Raqeeb, you know any imams like that? As bad as Hamza is, I don't think he can get a million brothers. So, for that, he's good. But Siraj turned right around, Imam Siraj turned right around and said, the Islam he should leave alone. So, as that is a base, Islam, and I don't want to get too much into the slavery aspect, but one of the things that we have to realize, that people of African American descent, Islam is not a new thing. Because there are recorded records of slavery within this country, that there were slaves that were Muslims that their masters allowed them to keep their names. And they actually wrote books, some translated the Quran, and so forth and so forth. So in that historical perspective, that shows you what Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran is true, right? That he said, never did he destroy a people until they first left off prayer. So even in the hardship or the oppression of slavery, Allah Ta'ala had Muslims in that mix, right? Coming from West Africa, Senegambia, Cameroon, Sierra Leone, etc., right? So now, let's move this up to the 20th century. Contrary to popular belief, there was two major movements that kind of implemented or portrayed Sunni Islam in America. One was called Dar Islam. The Dar Islam movement started in the early 1960s and basically to around 1989, 1990. But before that, there was another movement called the Spiritual Islamic Mission, or the Islamic Mission of America. And it says, for the propagation of Islam, the true faith. And this particular movement in Islam started before Noble Drew Ali. The first masjid, if you go on the internet, you know, because we like Sheikh Google, we like Sheikh Bing, you know, Sheikh Chrome. If you go on any one of those, right, and you type in the first masjid that was established in the United States, 2 out of 3 times it would come up in Iowa. Grand Rapids, I think, right? Grand Rapids, Iowa, right? Oh, is it Grand Rapids? Cedar Rapids. See, there you go, Cedar Rapids. But that is not true. In the right after World War I, there was a great influx of immigrants coming from Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and so forth into America, right? And they migrated up towards Michigan and Illinois, Minnesota, and Iowa. They just took that northwest position, right? So around 1919, the Ford Company, Henry Ford, he said, is recorded that the largest employees of the Ford Company at that time was Muslims. Muslims from overseas and African American Muslims that was converting to Islam. White people were actually the minority working in the Ford Company from 1919 to up to 1935. That's why when you go to Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan is so populated with Muslims, because they are descendants of the Muslims that came through in the early 20th century. During this time, in 1924, this mission, Islamic Mission of America, the first masjid was established in Brooklyn, New York in 1924. And the Imam, or the Sheikh of that time, his name was Sheikh Dawood Faisal. Sheikh Dawood Faisal. Sheikh Dawood Faisal was originally from Grenada. He was born in 1891. He came to the United States around 1916. And he was a scholar and of literature. And when he came into Islam, he went to Al-Azhar for 2 years. He didn't graduate, but he went for 2 years, and he came back to New York City. And he established what we call, and is still called to this day, the State Street Masjid. It was on State Street in Brooklyn, New York. And this is where my own father took his Shahada in 1955. This masjid was opened in 1924, right? One of the first African Americans that graduated from Al-Azhar was in 1953. Now, check this out. So, look how we always have to watch what's going on around us as Muslims. And we also, as we said earlier, we have to realize that we have enemies outside of our circle, and we have enemies within our circles, because sometimes we can be enemies of ourselves. In 1953, the Nation of Islam existed, right? But America was promoting the Nation of Islam more so than so-called Sunni Islam. Why do you think? The reason being is because one of the things that happened to African Americans in this country is like, if I was walking down the sidewalk, let's say in 1969, I'm walking down the sidewalk in the South, on the East Coast, not Los Angeles, because I said asked somebody was they from the South, and they was like, yeah, I'm from Los Angeles. So I was like, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like Georgia, Alabama, right? So if I'm walking down the South and on the sidewalk, and a white woman came, and she was walking down the sidewalk too, or a white man, I would have to step off the sidewalk and allow them to pass. This was law in this country, right? Now, can you imagine, like we come to this masjid, we here, we praying, we eating together. Can you imagine in 1953, if you had a room of these people, of African Americans in a room this large, saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, what would that have done to society at that particular time? So it was more easier for America to present a version of Islam that was deviant. So they said, okay, this is a black nationalist movement that represents Islam. And they teach hate against white people. So what does that do? That takes away all of the criminology that was happening to African Americans at that particular time in the country. Because remember, now we are saying that this masjid was established in 1924. Now, in the history of this masjid, it says that Sheikh Dawood was a muqaddam, or representative of an Algerian sheikh called Ahmed al-Wali. And he came as a result to study the arrival of the port of Brooklyn. And he started off as a merchant seaman, and this is how he got to Algeria, this is how he got to Al-Azhar, because he worked on a ship. Now, African Americans were in this masjid from 1924 to probably about 1950, they were the minority in the masjid. Now, they was the minority in the masjid in Brooklyn, New York. The population of the masjid was a mixture of Moroccans, Egyptians, Algerians, Sudanese, Somalians. Now, that's interesting to me, because that was around 1953, and look how undiverse our masjids are today. We don't have that type of population except for very few masjids and except for special occasions. Now, Sheikh Dawood established this masjid in 1924, and he returned to Allah in 1980. In 1954, his wife and himself and his wife, Khadija, came to LA in 1953 to establish the Muslim Women's Ethnic Committee, to teach Muslim women how to be ethical in their business practices, ethical in their spiritual practices, ethical in their relationships. And one of the things that the women was taught, not only about their deen, but they could be scholars within Islam, how they can be better wives, right? And how they can be entrepreneurs. Now, what was that? We're talking about 1950 something, so we're talking about over 80 something years ago. So where are we today in that particular concept, right? Now, the other thing that I want to point out about Sheikh Dawood, because I had to do some research, in the masjid where Sheikh Dawood stays, it's called the State Street Masjid, he legally petitioned the city of New York and the state of New York to be able to do name changes for those who converted to Islam, Islamic marriages, Islamic death certificates, name changes, and it was something else. So when I went online, Sheikh Google helped me with this one, I found an original copy of the Islamic Mission of America, and this is a Muslim birth certificate. And this is from Brother Abdur Rahman Harun, and he was born in 1934, and he received this in 1963, right? Also, they had an Islamic certificate of adoption. Now, you say, okay, well, they must be adopting children or something like this. No, this was their declaration of adoption to Islam, that they accepted Islam. Now, again, the question was that I'm asking, just imagine, now you have all of these Muslims that are praying 5 times a day, going to Hajj, going to Al-Azhar and other Islamic schools in America. But the perception is that the Nation of Islam was the predecessor to all of the so-called African American Muslims in this country. That is totally, totally untrue. Now, when you look at history as a whole, Islamically in this country, right? The way that Islam is presented is as a foreign thing. And that it originated in the East, and that anybody of non-immigrant stature or background that is practicing Islam, that we are following an Arab tradition. In the 1920s and the 1930s, to distinguish the difference between the Nation of Islam and the so-called brothers that was practicing on the Surat, was that they would call the brothers that was practicing so-called Sunni Islam Mohammedans. That's where the word comes from. They wanted to distinguish between people that knew who Muhammad ﷺ was and who didn't. Because if you go into the Nation of Islam, they say that Elijah Muhammad said that he was Rasulullah, right? Now, not to debate the thing, astaghfirullah, but he never said that. He never said that. But because he said that he was a messenger, they put that title on him to exclude him and say, okay, see, Islam is divisive. Islam is just like Christianity, that they have multiple prophets after the Prophet ﷺ, and this man here, he is calling people to nationalism, and he's a racist. So that's newsworthy, right? Because when Trump comes out and say that Mexicans are rapists and murderers, right, that catches your attention. So when the media comes out and say that Muslims are terrorists, that catches your attention. When people come out and say, well, you know, in some Muslim countries, women can't drive, that catches your attention. See, that is the enemy. So what happens is it puts us on a defensive where we are always trying to even the playing field and say, look, you don't have nothing to worry about, da-da-da-da-da, we okay, right? So now put yourself in a position in 1924, 1944, 1954, whereas if you was driving somewhere in the South or even in the North sometime, and the police pulled you over, let's pick a year, 1945. 1945 is I'm sorry, 1943, during the Second World War, America went around, and you can look this up, they went around and they started arresting Muslims. In World War II, Jehovah's Witnesses and Sunni Muslims decided that they was going to be conscientious objectors and they was not going to fight in the war. So the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover made a concerted effort to go around and arrest Muslims. He started with the African American community. Now, if there was no Muslims of African American descent, why would you go to their masjids? They went to the State Street Masjid, they went to the masjid in Iowa, they left those Muslims alone because some of them joined the war, some of them didn't. But since they had a few, they didn't mess with them. And they started going through Chicago, Detroit, New York, Philly, where some of the biggest concentrations of Muslims from this particular movement exist. So they started arresting them. And then they went to the Nation of Islam and started arresting them because they was also conscientious objectors. Now, if you remember your history, when Muhammad Ali decided that he was not going to fight in the Vietnam War, that's one of the things that he said, that he was a conscientious objector, right? And the first time his case came to the Supreme Court, it was denied, right? They heard the case and they was like, nah, he got to go to jail. So somebody found a loophole in the law that Jehovah's Witnesses were saying the same thing that the Muslims were saying, that they only fight in holy wars that God ordained in jihad, and that they would not fight for any type of nationalistic war. And you know, so that's where that was at. And so upon re-entering his petition to be excused from the Vietnam War, that was the criterion that they used for him not to be drafted in the Vietnam War or for him to go to jail. Now, the Muslims in the 1930s and the 1940s knew this, but they rather had spent the time in jail than to fight it. They said, well, we just go to jail. This is where the concept also that African American Muslims, most of us come from jails and prison systems. We accepted Islam within the prison. Well, I'm here to tell you, I have never been to prison except working in one. Okay? I'm a chaplain in the California Department of Corrections. So I've never been in prison. I accepted Islam in Brooklyn, New York. My wife accepted Islam and she was born in Brooklyn, New York. She claimed Queens, but I'm not going to hold that against her. But there is a great majority of Muslims. Like my wife, I think she's like third or fourth generation of her family. That's Muslims. So this idea that Islam started with the Nation of Islam is totally untrue. Last point I want to make. In conclusion, at the time that Sheikh Dawood started his masjid, you had, in New York, you had what they call the Harlem Renaissance, where the Renaissance, something that means to revitalize, right? So this is where some of the biggest scholars of our time came from. Carter G. Woodson, Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and you had a lot of what we call HBCs, historical black colleges, right? A lot of them was because we wasn't allowed to go to anyone else's colleges. So you had a lot of scholarly things going on in New York at this particular time. Also at this particular time, you had Noble Drew Ali and you had Marcus Garvey. And in between them, you had Booker T. Washington, Carter G. Woodson, and Du Bois. And in between that, you had Sheikh Dawood. Now, the other rap on Sheikh Dawood, and when I say rap, the other crime that Muslims want to do, and this leads back into my khutbah today. Sheikh Dawood, his sheikh was from Algeria, and his sheikh was Sufi. So that made Sheikh Dawood Sufi, right? So they was like, okay, well that's not real Islam anyway. Don't we have that perception? Because we see, that's why I premise what I said. We can have enemies outside of us, and we can have enemies within us. Because, all right, we know that the Prophet ﷺ did certain things. We also know, if you study the seerah, and this is why we have to read, and you can't limit yourselves to just one book or one sheikh. As far as if you research, or someone that we can go to that's much more learned than we are ourselves. But when we are researching Islam, you will find in Islam that the Prophet ﷺ sometimes told his Ahlul Bayt certain things that he did not tell his Sahaba, and vice versa. But even within this, that comes upon a diversity within the history of Islam when the Muslims had their civil war. But my point is that we will look at people that supposedly may be Sufi, Naqshbandi or Qadri or Tijani or what have you, and we will say, nah, they're not Muslim. But they will stand beside you. They pray to Allah Ta'ala 5 times a day. They get up for tahajjud. They give in sadaqah, right? They fulfill the 5 things that the Prophet ﷺ said that we have to fulfill. And you will turn around after you pray with them and say, they Sufi, man. Can't hang out with them. They be on them tasbees all the time. You know, dhikr, right? And Allah Ta'ala says, well, dhikr Allahu Akbar, right? So, okay, so if a brother spends or a sister spends a little bit more time in dhikr, how do we know that Allah Ta'ala is not accepting that ibadah? Because that may be keeping them out of trouble. That dhikr may be keeping them from smoking cigarettes. Or committing adultery. You know, because we know Muslims that have girlfriends, but we won't say anything about them, but we'll say our brother or sister is not Muslim because they Sufi. You see what they're doing? Look at it. Astaghfirullah. It's a shame. So Sheikh Dawood did not get the recognition of establishing a masjid and establishing a community, because from his community, that's where Dar al-Islam came from. And Dar al-Islam was Sheikh Imam Yahya Kareem, Imam Abdul Latif, and if you study history even more, Malcolm, rahimahullah, may Allah Ta'ala forgive him his sins and grant him paradise, because we truly believe that he was Shahirullah. Okay? Malcolm met all of these people. Because, you know, the story is, okay, Malcolm was in the nation, and then all of a sudden, boom, he makes his trip to Africa, and then he goes to Hajj, right? And boom, he comes back as a Muslim, and he dies a Shaheed. But we never asked the question, who influenced him? Of course, Allah Ta'ala brings anyone that he wants to Islam, but who influenced him? You will see many pictures of him talking to Sheikh Dawood or Imam Yahya Kareem. You will see many pictures of this. But see, this goes back again, and I'm finished. When we was talking about the first person that touched Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after he came from the womb of his mother, right? And I asked the question, Sheikh, at Juma today. I said, if I can send you back in time and you can witness the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would you go? Right? Most people say, yeah, I would love to do that. If I gave you the opportunity to be the first person to touch Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to hold him, knowing that he was going to be Rasulullah, Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would you do it? Right? Most people would say, yeah, I would do it. But look how much this woman is not mentioned in Islam by any of the big-time scholars. And I'm talking about Barakah. And when the Prophet ﷺ called her the mother after his mother, the after his right? So I asked the question, how many nitmas did she get for holding the Prophet ﷺ? Unimaginable. But you see, if we are not careful, the reason why some people buck against doing stuff like this and talking about African Americans, because you know the thing is, you know, African Americans, they're always crying. You know, they want reparations, right? They want some money, and all they're gonna do is buy a car with it. They don't know, they don't have no economic structure, right? That we want to be recognized, right? That's the cry. Not only from African Americans that's not Muslims, but African Americans that's Muslims. We want to be recognized. You know why? And I'm not ashamed to say, because if you live in a country, you was brought to a country beyond your will, and you help develop the economic structure of a country, and not be recognized for that? Oh yeah, I got something to say. I think it's insulting personally to give us a month. I really do. But I also think it's insulting for the Muslims to have problems with that, because if you look, remember I'm talking about the establishment of Islam and also the recognition of our enemies. If you look, when the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah to Medina, he went to the Ansars that had already accepted Islam, right? And they said that they would fight with the Prophet and protect the Prophet ﷺ, right? So you have the Muhajirs and the Ansars, right? Look at what we have in this country. We have Muhajirs and Ansars, right? But the Muhajirs and the Ansars are separate. Because the Muhajirs have to have some understanding, because what the Ansars, if you look at it this way, wasn't the Ansars the Muhajirs of Medina? They knew the territory. They knew what the Prophet ﷺ was going to get into. So it is imperative for us to be respectful of each other, regardless of our ethnicity, because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that this ain't going to matter. Your color, your race, your country, none of that is going to matter on the day of Qiyamah. So what? On the day of Qiyamah, somebody going to pull out an Algerian flag and say, yo, I'm a Muslim from Algeria? You know what I'm saying? Or I'm a Muslim from Nigeria? Brother. No, the hell with that. Astaghfirullah, excuse me, Sheikh. It's just not going to happen. Allah Ta'ala is going to put on the scale your salah. Right? In your salah, there is no color. Right? And then he's going to what? Look at the sunnah of your salat, because you know some of us lacking. We know we need to go make up some salats. Stop lying. So he's going to then turn to your sunnahs, fill those up, right? And then your nafils, right? Any that got any color in it? Any that got any nationality in it? We need to recognize each other for who we are. But recognition only comes upon with respect and love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm going to stand on this, because when we think about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does the first thought come to us that he was an Arab? Does it? It doesn't even matter. We talk about the Holy Last Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're supposed to talk about him with love and affection. So that's why I believe personally that we have duped ourselves to believe that we are all inclusive, because inclusiveness does not mean recognition. It does not. Because the only way that I can truly respect your heritage and your ethnicity is if I go and I love the Holy Last Messenger because I'm thankful that Allah Ta'ala sent him. Because remember that when the Prophet ﷺ asked his Sahaba, who amongst you would want to marry a woman of paradise? All of the Sahaba's hands went up. And when Barakah came out, all of the hands went down, except for Zayd. May Allah grant him Jannah.
Ameen.
Right? Because he looked beyond the color and the lineage of Barakah, and he looked at what the Prophet ﷺ said about her, that she was a woman of paradise. So when we see each other praying in the masjid, do we say the possibility that this brother or this sister can be a person of paradise? Only Allah knows, Allahu Alam. But we don't even give each other the benefit of the doubt. May Allah Ta'ala forgive us all our shortcomings and our sins, have mercy on our souls in this life and in the hereafter. May Allah Ta'ala forgive the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah Ta'ala protect the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah Ta'ala give victory to the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And may Allah Ta'ala protect the Ummah of Muhammad from the hellfire. أقول هذا واستغفر الله وعليكم الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.